Tenant selection is probably the most important thing for a landlord, particularly with the Renters' Rights Act due to abolish Section 21 evictions this coming summer or the autumn maybe. And so it's going to be a lot harder to put right bad choices. Good tenants make life as a landlord easy, a pleasure even. Problematic tenants, on the other hand, can make the lives of their landlords, letting agents and neighbours a misery. And we all know that prevention is better than cure. But how can landlords choose good tenants? How can they know whether the person who wants to rent the property is as lovely as they seem, or whether they're just a barefaced liar? Well, that's what this video is all about. I share lots of practical tips to help you choose good tenants, including how to reference tenants properly, whether or not you use letting agents. And I also share what the rent guarantee insurance companies look for when they decide whether the landlord can take out rent guarantee insurance. I'm Suzanne Smith, lawyer turned landlord, and I run the Independent Landlord website and YouTube channel to provide straightforward, balanced and practical information for landlords and property businesses. You can find a written version of this YouTube video with even more information on it on the independentlandlord.com/choose-good-tenants, what it says on the tin. Right, let's get started. What is a good tenant? What do we know what we're looking for? So for me, it boils down to this. They pay their rent on time and in full. They look after the property and let me know when something needs repairing, and if it's something that they should repair, they repair it themselves. It's good communication. Number 3, they comply with their obligations in the tenancy agreement. Number 4, they are good neighbours. And that's pretty much all I care about. And I have this in mind when I'm selecting tenants. You can't just tell by what somebody does for a living. I know of plenty of stories where you have a single doctor who looks fantastic on paper, earns a good amount of money, but they're a bad tenant. They don't pay the rent on time and they don't look after the property. And on the other hand, I have a number of families with pets, some of whom receive benefits, and they're fantastic tenants. I've luckily never had a bad tenant, touch wood, although I actually don't think that luck has anything to do with it. And now I'm going to take you through what I look for, so you don't have to rely on lady luck. The first thing is affordability. It's really important that the tenants can afford the rent. If they can't afford it, it's not going to end well, unless they have some sort of fairy godmother or parents who are going to be paying the rent, in which case the parents need to be able to afford the rent on top of their other obligations. But how can we judge affordability? Somebody might have a really good salary, but they might not be able to afford it. But the basic level is, if you're wanting to get rent guarantee insurance, which is something I do now, the tenants will need to prove evidence showing monthly gross income is at least 2.5 times the monthly rent. Number 2, they can show evidence that their retirement monthly income is 2.5 times the monthly rent for those people who have a pension. And number 3 is evidence of immediate access to savings of at least 3 times the monthly rent for the 6 months prior to the start of the policy. So that means that they've had that money in their account for 6 months before the landlord takes out the rent guarantee insurance policy. And if they're self-employed, they'll need to show that the previous 3 months' bank statements or confirmation from an accountant show that their gross monthly income or the previous tax return shows 3 times the monthly rent. This income can include benefits such as universal credit, and I've obtained rent guarantee insurance for tenants who receive universal credit. Also, as an aside, when the Renters' Rights Act comes into force, it's going to be illegal to turn down tenants who are on benefits unless they don't meet the affordability criteria. I personally like to see income of more than 2.5 times the rent, so the tenants have a cushion and it also enables them to save, and I think that's a good thing. I like to see a good track record of them paying rent. And that's very important because somebody might have an income of more than 2.5 times the rent, but they're a spendthrift. They have an expensive lifestyle and live beyond their means, falling behind with their rent. A good way to check if they pay their rent on time is via a tenant reference service that uses open banking. What is open banking? Well, referencing companies use open banking as a secure way for tenants to electronically share their financial records from their online bank account. And the tenant authorizes the bank to release certain information. So it's not full access, but it's a snapshot from the past 12 months. And it categorizes the income and any mortgage or rent repayments so that the referencing company can easily make an affordability assessment. Also, you can ask to see their bank statements. So number 3, I do very much prefer someone with a stable job. And you can get a tenant reference. That includes an employer reference. But you can also check them out on LinkedIn to see if they've moved around a lot or whether they've been at a company for a while and have got promoted. But if somebody recently has moved jobs, you could also see their employment contract and see, does it have a probationary period? What's the notice period? People on 0 hours contracts and other temporary contracts or in their probationary period can be a bit more problematic. However, if they can show through their bank statements that they've had a regular income in the past, they've always managed their finances well, and they've never previously been in rent arrears, and they have a good credit score, then they might be really good candidates and it would be definitely worth looking at them. So the next one is a good track record of being a good tenant. So if the applicants have previously rented, the landlord reference is really important because they'll be able to confirm whether or not the tenants have been in arrears, whether they've looked after the property and whether they'd recommend them. And then they can say why they understand the tenants are moving on. So if a reference is a little vague or non-committal, particularly if it's from an agent on behalf of the landlord, I try and speak to the landlord because sometimes a pause can be very revealing. And one thing to be aware is that references from the likes of OpenRank are often just a few ticks in a comment box. I've done them myself and they don't take very long and you don't actually have to give that much information. So it really is helpful to speak to the landlord yourself if you can get hold of their number. But do bear in mind that sometimes landlords just want to get shot of problematic tenants and they might not tell you the whole truth. And that's why it makes sense to ask for a reference from the previous landlord as well, unless they've stayed with their current landlord for a long time. This is because the previous landlord's got no axe to grind, they've got nothing to lose, and they're likely to be more open, as they've got nothing to lose if they give a bad reference, because the tenants have already moved on. Number 5 is a credit check. And this has lots of elements to it, and all of the standard tenant referencing services should be able to provide this to you. The first bit is a credit score from a credit referencing agency, and this is a statistical measure of the likelihood that the applicant will pay their rent on time. The next one is fraud check. And so this looks at linked addresses and identity and fraud information services to see whether this person really is who they say they are. The next one is a search for outstanding debt. And so it'll look to see if anything's registered at the county court, like a CCJ, that's a county court judgment, and other court information like bankruptcies, IVAs, that's an individual voluntary arrangement that people enter into with their creditors when they get into debt, and they'll look for it over a certain period. And the credit check will also show previous addresses of the applicants. And that's really useful because you can try and marry it up with what they say about where they've lived and who their landlords are. Number 6 is no red flags on social media or Google. Do I check applicants on social media and Google? Absolutely. Oh, why wouldn't you? The information is out there. I don't just rely on what I get from letting agents or from the tenant referencing service. And you can see a lot about people by looking at their feeds on social media. And Google is useful too. I've seen all sorts of things about people on Google. And then finally, number 7 is trust your gut. If they come for a viewing, if you're doing it themselves, are they on time? How have they communicated with you? How are they presented? How do they talk to their partner and children? Does it all add up? How would you feel if they live next door to you? And do they give you bad vibes? Are they rude, pushy, or too vague? All of these things, and just do trust your gut. So let's go on to some other tips. Tenant application form. Now, if you use a letting agent, they will do this. But if you're a landlord, you can do it as well. And I have one on my website that you're welcome to download, and you can find the link here. So once you've got an applicant who's ready to pay a holding deposit and go through referencing, do get them to fill in an application form, and that way you can do a final screen before you pay for the referencing and just have a look at all the answers to the questions. And it also later will help you cross-check the information that the credit checks will reveal, previous addresses and things like that. And it's really good to have that as a document. The next thing is, if you use letting agents, ask to see the references. After all, letting agents act for landlords. They can't turn you down if you're registered with the Information Commissioner's Office, that's the ICO, and you have a data protection notice. And the ultimate decision sits with you. And if you're wondering how to find out information about this, I've got it in this link here. And as it's such an important decision, landlords should be actively involved and not just leave it to the letting agent, even if you have full management. It's a good idea to meet them. And it is the decision of the landlord to choose who should go forward to referencing. It's not the letting agent's decision. Sure, you can take their advice, but I do check them out, because sometimes letting agents are just pleased to get the property let, and they're not so concerned about getting the absolute right person, which we are as landlords. So when I used to use letting agents, I don't anymore, I do it myself. I would make the initial decision as to who would proceed to referencing after they'd given me the options. And I had the opportunity to say no if I didn't think they were right for the property. So do meet the shortlist in person. And it comes down to what I was talking about, the gut feel. How do you feel about them? Do they seem legit? Is what they say, does it stack up? Do you get a nice feeling about them? Given it's such an important decision, it really is worth spending a little bit of money to try and get the right applicant. And even if it means you having a void for a few weeks until you get the right applicant, because it's going to be so much harder for us to repent at leisure once Section 21 is abolished. So that brings me to the end of this little video. If you've got this far and you found it helpful, it would be really great if you could subscribe to my new channel so you don't miss out on future videos. I've got lots and lots of content planned, lots of how-to videos. And if you don't want to subscribe, then at least give it a thumbs up, because that helps as well. And if you want to keep up to date with what's happening, you can subscribe to my weekly newsletter. And here's the link here. It's independentlandlord.com/subscribe. It's totally free. And take a look at my other videos, including my free training course, The Renter's Rights Bill Explained, which you can see here. See you soon.